Eric Swab, who will be giving a talk on Fremont experimental forest. But before we jump into Eric's presentation, we'd like to remind you all again that we are on ManitouSpringsHeritageCenter.org, and this is one of many presentations in a series of presentations that we have scheduled at the Heritage Center. We have roughly about 14 or 15 or so presentations scheduled for the balance of 2021. Plus, we have lots of exciting events scheduled at the Manitou Springs Heritage Center. And we're hoping to open up the Heritage Center within the next couple weeks or so. But in order to do so, we need your help. We need volunteers to help assist visitors to the museum. We need people working the desk, basically monitoring the activities inside the museum while guests visit our many exhibits at the Heritage Center. We got several events coming up at the Heritage Center, including our brunch. And our brunch is scheduled for May 9th. It's going to be held at the historic Craftwood Inn. And for many of you who haven't visited the Craftwood Inn, it's an arts and crafts style designed facility that's located on El Paso Boulevard. It was designed by a gentleman named Rollin Boutwell back in the, I think it was the early 1800s. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it's one of several arts and crafts design buildings located in the city of Manitou Springs. And fortunately, many of these designed or arts and crafts design structures are located on El Paso. There's like a group of several buildings there, including Anna Ledge and the Craftwood Inn, and amongst others. We also have the Briarhurst, which is based on the same type of design. But we invite you again to visit our Mother's Day brunch. That's scheduled on May 9th. And we're going to have 2 or 3 seatings during this event so that everybody can be served and properly distanced at the brunch. It's a major fundraiser for the Manitou Springs Heritage Center. And tickets can be found on our website at ManitouSpringsHeritageCenter.org. We got special pricing, I see, for membership for members of the Heritage Center. And if you haven't gotten your Heritage Center membership yet, you can do so at our website, ManitouSpringsHeritageCenter.org. We have several levels of membership, including the senior levels and student levels set at $15. From there, you can contribute to the Heritage Center as your budget permits. But again, our brunch is scheduled for Mother's Day. That's coming up on May 9th. And let's see here, the seating times are at 9:30, 11, and 12:30. If you're a late sleeper like I am, you'll want to go to that 11 or 12:30 sitting. There'll be plenty of food remaining at those later seatings. Again, the brunch is very affordable. It's $35 for members, I see, and $30, excuse me, for current members, it's $30 a person and $35 for non-members. So if you're not a member yet, you can save $5 by enrolling as a member of the Manitou Springs Heritage Center. That's our brunch, our Mother Day brunch. It's a major fundraiser for the Heritage Center, scheduled again on May 9th. That's Mother's Day. And we look forward to seeing you all there. We got some special surprises at the Mother's Day brunch. And we hope that everybody this morning can make our fundraiser scheduled for May 9th. We also have other presentations scheduled at the Heritage Center. And so far, we're going virtual on everything. We're virtualizing exhibits as well as all our presentations so far. But as things open up later in the season, we're hoping to go live again. But for now, we're scheduling virtual presentations at the Heritage Center. We got another presentation coming up later on in May. That would be April 24th. It's called Time Spring Eternal. It's an interview with an author named Rutherford Case, and she'll be describing historical events in Manitou Springs around the time of 1882. Let's see here. She'll be talking about the Queen Anne bathhouse, amongst other things. And again, the name of that presentation is Time Springs Eternal. That's scheduled for April 24th. That's a Saturday at 10 a.m. in the morning. And all our presentations, incidentally, are being advertised on our website. You know, you can look ahead if you like and see what else is scheduled at the Manitou Springs Heritage Center. But for the most part, our presentations are scheduled on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. The next one being scheduled on April 24th. And it describes, again, 1882 Manitou. I wonder what that would have been like in 1882. There wasn't no vehicles or cars running around, probably a lot of horse-drawn carriages. But again, you know, we're going to focus on different buildings and things that might have existed in Manitou in 1882. Again, if you want to catch what it was like to live through 19th century Manitou, visit our presentation scheduled for April 24th at 10 o'clock. And that's this presentation entitled Time Spring Eternal with author Ruth Rutherford Case. And so what else we got to talk about here? Oh, the Brew Festival. Well, we're scheduling our Brew Festival this year, everybody. It's scheduled for September 18th. That's on a Saturday from 1 until 5 p.m. If you haven't purchased your tickets yet, you can purchase those tickets on ManitouSpringsHeritageCenter.org. That's the sixth annual Heritage Brew Festival. Again, that's another major fundraiser that we have, sponsored by the Manitou Springs Heritage Center. It's a lot of fun. We usually invite, about 20 or 25 brewers or so, and we're featuring 3 bands this year, including Leo and the Lark, the Red Mountain Boys, which I understand play some great Colorado Appalachian style bluegrass music, and also a group by the name of Family Elephant. And that group, I tell you, loves to rock. So again, you know, we invite you to visit our 6th annual Heritage Brew Festival scheduled for September 18th. I lost it there. That's on a Saturday. To get your tickets, get on our website. That's at ManitouSpringsHeritageCenter.org. I mentioned earlier at the start of my spiel that we're looking for volunteers. The Manitou Springs Heritage Center is looking for volunteers. We plan to go live, hopefully by May, but we need some people to help out at the Heritage Center. Maybe a day or 2 a week, you know, whatever days are suited for your volunteer schedule. We encourage you to contact the Manitou Springs Heritage Center, either on our website, ManitouSpringsHeritageCenter.org, or leave a message on our phone. We can reach that area code 719-685-1454, or you can email us at manitouheritage@gmail.com. We're looking for volunteers. Help! We want to open our doors. We're tired of being sitting indoors and not being able to see everybody's face. So help us reopen the doors at the Manitou Springs Heritage Center. You know, we feel it's pretty safe. It's getting safer these days. You know, it's a masked event. However, you know, we do encourage social distancing at the Heritage Center. But again, we're trying to open up our doors sometime in May, and we're looking for volunteers. So we encourage everybody, if you have time in your busy schedules, we encourage you to contact the Manitou Springs Heritage Center and volunteer to man, I guess, or woman, the front desk at our museum. We're looking for volunteers. And again, you know, we've already covered several events, but, you know, I gab too much. And the purpose of
Okay, Mike.
are we ready, Carrie?
We're ready to start. You can give the intro for Eric if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, well, you know, we have a very special guest this morning, Eric Swab. Eric, of course, has been around town for a long time, and he's I guess he would be considered the town explorer. He gets off the beaten trails, as many of you who know Eric realize. Eric loves to get off the trail and find unique places in the Pikes Peak region. And so one of those unique places will be the topic of his discussion this morning. That would be the, I lost my train of thought, but Eric, Eric, you're here. Eric
It's
is
the
here.
Fremont
And he's
experimental
going to
forest.
talk about Fremont, which has been around, and it was an experimental forest. And there's some buildings up there which were all torn down, but there seem to be some remains up there. It's what, about 3 miles off trail, I think. And
Oh,
it's
no, it's right on a trail.
it's on a trail. Oh
When you
no.
hike up Bar Trail, you get to the No Name Creek, you take the right fork and you're just a quarter of a mile from the Fremont Experimental Forest. And there's an informative sign up there now that tells you what was going on.
Well, so there you have it. We'll be able to find at least one of your destinations. Just follow the signs in the areas to the Fremont Experimental Forest. And without further ado, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, Eric is also an author. He's authored a book about the Manitou Incline. Very good book. If you haven't read it yet, you can pick that up at the Manitou Springs Heritage Center's website. And the other book was about Fred Barr, another historical figure in Manitou, known for constructing the Barr Trail and the Barr Camp, amongst other things. But again, we have both of Eric's books available through our bookstore at the Manitou Springs Heritage Center.org website. But with that, I'm talking too much, but without further ado, let me introduce to you explorer and author Eric Swab.
Thanks, Mike. If I may be permitted to plug one more book.
Oh, okay.
I've just finished writing The Granite Attraction, Stories of the Pikes Peak Highway and Summit, which is due to be published on May 1st. And I'll be letting everybody on my hiking list know about that, of course, and I'll let Mike know as well.
Well, we appreciate that, Eric. We look forward to reading their new book, and it's always filled with lots of information. But this morning, we're talking about Fremont. I'm going to hand this over to you, Eric.
All right. Well, thank you for coming out on such a beautiful day. It would have been a better day to go hiking than to listen to me, but so be it. I'll just get right into it. Let's see here. There we go. On September 4th of 1909, Carlos G. Bates and 3 co-workers lugged a rain-soaked tent and their equipment from the top of the Manitou Incline 1 mile west to a location on the south side of Mount Manitou. This hike normally takes about 30 minutes, but it took them over 2 hours because of the heavy, wet load. By the time they reached their destination, they were wishing that they had hired a couple of Fred Barr's burros to carry their gear. This was the beginning of the second Forest Service experiment station in the United States. Over the next 25 years, the science that would inform reforestation and contribute to the silviculture of the Central Rocky Mountains would be developed here. What is silviculture? The dictionary definition is the care and cultivation of forest trees. Mr. Bates had a more descriptive definition. In his words, silviculture will imply the art, nay, the science of growing in every particular site the species which will make the most of the site and will produce the largest and most valuable crop for human use. What was motivating these 4 men to set up a camp on this remote site on Pikes Peak? To answer that question, we must look at a little history. In the mid-19th century, the US government owned much of the forested West. Over the years, these forests had been devastated by wildfires, by logging for railroads, from mining and the building industry. The government was beginning to realize that something needed to be done to protect the resource, this green gold that was so important to the growth of the country. In 1849, the Department of Interior was established and given the responsibility of protecting the public forests against unauthorized harvesting. Eventually, Congress realized that it wasn't enough just to tell the timber companies to keep their hands off this national resource. They needed to educate the public why it was important to protect and manage the forests. So Congress established the Division of Forestry within the Department of Agriculture in 1862. The Forest Reserve Act of 1891 authorized the President of the United States to set aside publicly owned forest lands as forest reserves. These lands could not be homesteaded, and logging would be strictly controlled. President Harrison designated 13 million acres of forest reserves, including Yellowstone and Pikes Peak, in 1892. President Cleveland set aside another 5 million acres. The champion of forest reserves, Teddy Roosevelt, set aside 230 million acres. The Department of Agriculture's Division of Forestry thought the Department of Interior was doing a pretty poor job of managing the forests. Thus began the struggle between the Interior and the Agriculture departments over which should have jurisdiction. This went on until Gifford Pinchot, a personal friend of Teddy Roosevelt, was made the chief of the newly formed U.S. Forest Service in 1905. With Roosevelt's support, the Department of Agriculture gained control of the forest reserves. While all this intergovernmental squabbling was going on in the US, the Germans were looking at another side of forest management. In 1868, a group of German foresters and soil conservationists met in Vienna and discussed the need to develop the science that would guide the management of their forests. By 1874, the German government had established 8 experiment stations in university campuses, staffed by professors. From this background, Bernhard Fairnell, a German forest scientist, immigrated to the United States. In 1886, he was appointed the 3rd chief of the U.S. Division of Forestry. This was nearly 20 years before Pinchot. Fairnell, unable to sell his science agenda to the Washington bureaucracy, turned his efforts to education. In 1898, he established the first school of forestry in the U.S. at Cornell. Raphael Zahn, an immigrant from Russia, graduated from the first class of Cornell in 1901. Zahn took the job with the Forest Service and eventually was able to do what Fairnell could not. He convinced Gifford Pinchot that the Forest Service needed to establish a series of experiment stations in the West to develop the scientific approach to forest management. Pinchot put him in charge of the Office of Silvics in 1907. In 1908, Zahn established the Fort Valley Experiment Station near Flagstaff, Arizona. He put Gustav Pearson in charge, a 1907 graduate of the University of Nebraska School of Forestry. He was the first in a series of government-run experiment stations. In 1909, Zahn picked Carlos G. Bates, a classmate of Pearson, to be the chief of Silvics in Region 2. Bates was officed in Denver, and his range of responsibility included Colorado, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas. He was charged with locating a site for the second experiment station. And by March of 1909, he was looking on Pikes Peak, in the vicinity of Minnehaha, Dark Canyon, Ruxton Park, Lake Moraine, and the valleys of North and South Cascade Creeks. In August of 1909, Bates was about to sign an agreement under which the city of Colorado Springs would provide 160 acres of land between Old Mountain View and Lake Moraine for the station. He took the contract home and read it one night and discovered that there were too many restrictions on the use of the land. The next morning, Bates rejects the offer and begins his search again. The well-known ecologist, Dr. Frederick Clements, and his wife, Dr. Edith Clements, had been in the Pikes Peak area since the late 1890s and had developed the 3 botanical laboratories, one above Timberline on Pikes Peak, one at Minnehaha, and one on the Colorado College campus. As a result, they were very familiar with Pikes Peak. Bates undoubtedly knew Dr. Clements since he taught at the University of Nebraska at the time Bates was a student there. After rejecting the city's offer, Bates enlisted the help of Dr. Clements in locating a site. They settled on a location about a mile west of the top of the incline. The incline had been completed in July of 1908, and its proximity was considered a plus for the site. Throughout the life of the station, most of their materials and supplies were hauled up the incline. Bates wanted to name the station Minne-Yamani, which in the Sioux language means 3 waters. He thought it would be appropriate since 3 tributaries of Rock Creek flow through the station, but the government thought otherwise. The name Fremont Forest Experiment Station was taken from the Fremont Trail, which passes through the southern part of the 360-acre site. The name was changed to Rocky Mountain Forest Experiment Station in May 1st of 1925 to reflect the greater scope of activities. The name was changed again to the Fremont Experimental Forest, probably in the 1950s. Bates did refer to the 3 tributaries as Wazilla, Numpa, and Yamani, meaning 1, 2, 2, 3. A diary of the first 16 months of operation by the station tell us that Carlos Bates and Dr. Frederick Clements and Alva Hamill and Red Finkbeiner and Harry Rupp had hiked into the site from Minnehaha on September 2nd, carrying with them 300 lodgepole pine seedlings from the Cheyenne forest. That same day, they planted 160 of these seedlings, and the next day, 100 more. Bates realized that he needed to balance the enthusiasm of these young men with experience. Joe Strong, the man on the left, who Bates hired to supervise the construction of the station, was 62. Jimmy Cribbs, next to Strong, was a 67-year-old Civil War veteran. He was hired as the cook, a good position to keep the younger men in line. The younger men were Harry Rupp, Joe Stafford, Lewis Chapman, and Red Finkbeiner. They began by digging a 700-foot long ditch for a pipeline from a spring in Numpa Gulch that would supply water to the administration area. The Pikes Peak granite provided considerable resistance to this effort, causing the workers to make frequent trips to the incline to resharpen their tools, forcing them to resort to dynamite. A concrete dam was built at the spring to impound the water. This project took 2 months to complete, but the dam is still there and it still holds water. They also began constructing a temporary building that would serve as a bunkhouse, mess hall, and laboratory, which they finished in November of 1909. Because this was a government installation, one of the first things they did was to raise a flagpole to make sure that it was tall enough to impress the neighborhood wildlife. They spliced 2 trees together. Those first 16 months were a mix of silvicultural experiments in construction. Boundaries were surveyed, fences built, trails were constructed, supplies were hauled in from the incline and from the cog station at Minnehaha. At first, the trail from the incline to the station was not wide enough to accommodate wagons, so supplies were dragged in by mules. Later, the trail was widened enough to accommodate a specially designed narrow horse-drawn wagon. The U.S. Weather Bureau was a partner in this endeavor. They contracted with Lewis C. Chapman in December to construct 3 weather station towers, which he completed in January of 1910. Eventually, 14 weather stations were constructed on Pikes Peak and tended by station staff. In 1910, an addition was made to the original shack, and a separate bunkhouse was constructed. In the same year, a small greenhouse and boiler house were constructed. The boiler house supplied hot water for heating the greenhouse. A combination root cellar and woodshed and chicken coop were also constructed that year. The station had phone service by the end of 1910. If you look closely, you'll see the bells for the phone service right here over the door. During the summer, a group of 5 forestry students from the University of Nebraska came to the station expecting to get some hands-on experience in forestry. They were immediately put to work digging the basement for the new addition. One of those students scratched his initials, RDG, and the date 1910 in the concrete slab. This was probably Raymond D. Garber, who graduated from the University of Nebraska in 1912 and went on to become acting chief of the Division of Forestry Economics in the U.S. Forest Service. In 1912, the greenhouse was enlarged, and the boiler house moved down near Rock Creek, where it would be closer to the wood supply. Eventually, all the dwellings were heated by hot water. Construction of the station continued until 1917, when the station consisted of 4 dwellings, a laboratory, greenhouse, seed house, cone drying shed, root cellar, and woodshed, boiler house, and a barn. Most of the buildings had concrete foundations and were of wood frame construction. The seed house is the only building to survive. Because it housed a gasoline-fired seed kiln, it was built of cast concrete. For a short period in 1918, the station closed because the war made finding labor nearly impossible. Bates was about to enlist when he was struck down by the 1918 flu pandemic. In 1919, electricity was brought to the station from Minnehaha. This allowed them to install a drag saw at the boiler house, which greatly facilitated the cutting of logs, which up to then had been a hand operation. In 1919, also saw the installation of the sewer system. This was not just a pipe that discharged waste into the stream. but they built a septic tank. Somewhere here, I've got a drink. Trying to eat. There it is. Excuse me just a second.
Take your time. This is really interesting, Eric. I appreciate this.
Well, thank you. Okay. The weather stations had instruments for recording high and low temperatures, wind speed and direction, relative humidity, transpiration, rainfall, snowfall, and sunshine. Some of this data was recorded automatically and sent to the laboratory over electrical wires. Since they did not have electricity until 1919, they used both wet cell and dry cell batteries to provide the power for this data transmission. Bates wanted to determine the rate of evaporation of moisture from tree leaves. He was not satisfied with the available devices for measuring transpiration, so he invented his own and received a patent for his idea. These devices were custom made by the Durbin Muckle Manufacturing Company of Denver, a maker of surgical instruments. They also collected soil temperature data. Iron pipes of varying lengths were driven into the ground at various locations. Each pipe had a cap covering the top, and from which was suspended a thermometer. Another device that was buried in the ground is something of a mystery. These consisted of a sheet metal tube about 24 inches long with holes in the sides, buried vertically in the ground. Into the tube was placed 4 wooden cylinders, each separated from the other by a rubber washer, and all strung on a wire. The top of the tube was covered by a tin can to keep the rainwater out. Our best guess is that these were used to gather soil moisture information. At periodic intervals, the wood cylinders might be pulled out of the tube and weighed. Then, by comparing the weight of each cylinder with its dry weight, the moisture content of the soil at the various depths could be determined. Silviculturists are interested in the intensity of sunlight that reaches the tree leaves in various forest settings. Bates used the Clements photometer for measuring light intensity. This was invented by his professor and mentor, Dr. Frederick Clements. If you visit the site today, you may notice 4-inch square wooden posts, which mark the corners of 200-foot square plots that made up the 3 plantations in the immediate vicinity of the administrative area. Some of the plots were simply used for observation, and some contained active experiments. Thousands of trees at the station were tagged with numbers. Periodically, the growth and health of these trees was measured and recorded. Because of the meteorological data being collected, they could correlate the growth of the trees with weather data. So what exactly were these scientists trying to learn? Clearly, successful reforestation was the primary concern. How do you plant trees that will produce the fastest and strongest source of lumber possible in a given area? Are there foreign species that might perform better in the Rocky Mountains? Bates also set out to answer the basic questions that had been puzzling foresters all over the world. How many seeds do trees produce, and what becomes of them? And why do so many seedlings die? And why is it that seedlings of one species survived on one slope and the seedlings of a different species on another slope. Answering these questions required comparing one species with another, which in turn required gathering seeds from various parts of the country and the world. This is a list of trees they attempted to grow at the station. The ones in green were the most successful. Of all the exotic trees that were planted at the station, none have survived except for 5 specimens of Japanese larch. These trees look healthy, but are not reproducing. Seeds were brought to the station from these places. Staff at the Fremont learned that seeds gathered close to the area being reforested were the most likely to succeed than seeds that come from different environments. Pine cones require heat to release their seeds. At the time, it was commonly believed that drying cones in the sun was the only way to produce undamaged seeds. Bates experimented with seed kilns to determine what temperature would produce the most successful seeds from a given species. Bates proved that seed production could be greatly accelerated with these kilns without damaging the seeds. To test the rate of germination, they would plant a given number of seeds in a pan of soil and wait. When a seed sprouted, they would pull it out with a pair of tweezers and count it. This procedure would be repeated daily until no more seeds sprouted. They would then compare the number of sprouts with the number of seeds planted to get the germination rate of that species. They tried various methods of planting seeds. They scattered seeds on the ground without any preparation. Another technique was to scarify the soil before sowing the seeds. In another plot, they covered the seeds with mulch. They also tried sowing the seeds on top of the snow so that as the snow melted, the seeds would have a moist soil in which to germinate. They even tried planting seeds with a corn planter. They learned that seedlings grown in the protection of a greenhouse or a planting frame, then when transplanted in the forest, had a better survival rate than seeds sown directly on the ground. Mistletoe in the forest pines was a problem. So Bates experimented with crossbreeding mistletoe-resistant trees with those that were more prone to the parasite. Bates studied the effects of the forest growth on stream flow. In the Rio Grande National Forest, he set up another experiment station near Wagon Wheel Gap. He selected 2 drainage systems with very similar characteristics. He observed the stream flows in these 2 systems for 9 years, and then clear-cut the forest in one of the drainages, and continued to observe the stream flows for another 7 years. While the results of his experiments have been controversial, they formed for Bates a lifelong belief that trees help prevent flooding and that forestation is a better solution to flood control than building dams. This was the first such experiment done in the United States. Bates studied one experiment which is still visible today was the Douglas fir cutting study. This was designed to determine which harvesting techniques would be the most beneficial for new forest growth. On the north face slope of the upper Wazilla Gulch, 4 200-foot by 200-foot square plots were laid out. Plot 1, the westernmost, was clear cut. Plot 2, left natural. Plot 3 was shelter wood cut, which means that all but 83 trees were removed. And plot 4 was selective cut. All but 271 trees were removed. The reproductive success rates of the remaining trees were monitored. The shelter wood plot produced the most new trees. Today's visitors viewing the station from the rocky point above the administrative area can easily identify the clear-cut plot because it is completely filled with aspen. The shelter wood cut has fewer aspen, but still shows up as a square plot surrounded by the darker green Douglas firs. Bates understood that location greatly influences the chance of a tree's reaching its greatest potential as a source of lumber. In addition to the 360-acre experiment station at Mount Manitou, experiments were conducted at 7 other plantations on Pikes Peak and 6 different sites in Colorado, as well as 2 in Wyoming and 1 each in South Dakota and Nebraska. How many people worked at the Fremont? From the station's diary of the first 16 months, we learned that the staff turnover was high. Staffing levels varied from 1 to 12 on any given day. The average level was between 4 and 5 people. It's appropriate to look at the lives of some of the people who lived up there and worked at the station. Carlos Glazier Bates was born in Topeka, Kansas on October 4th of 1885. His father, John Bates, was an Episcopal minister who held 3 degrees and was an accomplished botanist. His mother, Sarah, was in the first graduating class at Vassar College and pursued her interest in astronomy throughout her life. Carlos and his older brother, Luke, accompanied their father into the mission field among the Sioux Indians. This is where Carlos acquired his knowledge of the Sioux language. In 1907, he graduated from the University of Nebraska with a Bachelor of Science in Forestry. He was certainly a student of Charles Beesey, the eminent biologist known for his taxonomy of flowering plants. He was probably also a student of Dr. Frederick Clements. After graduation, Carlos went to work for the U.S. Forest Service in Washington, D.C., reporting to Raphael Zahn, then chief of Silvics. At first, he worked on the silvicultural study of hickory, and later on, a windbreak planting study in Nebraska, Sandhills. While working in the Sandhills project, he wrote his first of over 60 published technical papers. In 1909, he was promoted to the chief of Silvics for Region 2 at age 23, and with an annual salary of $1,000. He moved to the office in Denver. In that same year, he began the search for the site for Region 2's experiment station. The next year, his annual salary was raised to $1,400. He married his first wife, Nettie, sometime before 1912. They had 3 children, Mary, Carlos, and George. During the winter of 1916 and 17, Carlos, his wife, and their 3 children lived at the station. They shared games and meals with the ranger John Glendenning and his wife Florence, and their 2 girls, and with Mr. and Mrs. Claude Tillotson, who had been working at the Wagon Wheel Gap. Bates was a pipe smoker. However, his sense of environmental ethics was somewhat different than ours today. I have found Prince Albert tobacco cans at various places throughout the station. It appears that Bates just dropped his tins wherever he had emptied them. In 1920, Bates moved his office from Denver to the downtown post office building in Colorado Springs. He hired Clara Scamser as his clerk, who proved invaluable in keeping up with the recording of the results of the experiments being conducted at the station. Even though Bates had a residence in Colorado Springs, he spent most of his time at the Fremont station and visited the other sites in Region 2 for which he was responsible. In June of 1927, Bates was transferred to the Forest Products Laboratory in Great Lakes Station, Madison, Wisconsin. He did not stay there long because he missed working outdoors. He transferred to the Lake States Experiment Station in St. Paul, Minnesota, where Raphael Zahn was his boss once again. Zahn gave Bates his choice of projects to work on, and Bates chose the Shelter Belt program and continued his study of the forest influence on stream flow. He had divorced Nettie in 1924 and married Hazel, and with whom he had another son named Philip. Bates died on July 22nd, 1949. Richard Sartz, in his article entitled Carlos G. Bates, Maverick Forest Service Scientist, writes, certainly one of the most illustrious careers in scientific forestry during the later years of his formative period belongs to Carlos G. Bates. There were other notable researchers, of course, but Bates was outstanding for his keen mind, capabilities, versatility. Where others excelled in one field, Bates distinguished himself in 3: shelter belt forestry, silvics, and watershed management. In 1920, Congress failed to appropriate any money for the station. In February, the newspaper raised the alarm, proclaiming that the loss of the station would lead to loss of reforestation, which was needed to protect the city's watershed for the production of timber. The Rotary Club rallied to the cause. They lobbied Congressman Timberlake and Senator Phipps, who were successful in getting some additional money tucked into the appropriation for the Department of Agriculture, and the work at the Fremont continued. The next year, the Kiwanis Club jumped in and successfully urged Congress to continue funding the station. I don't know if Bates was a member of either of these service clubs. Nevertheless, it is interesting that these clubs were concerned enough to press their congressman to support the station. Next, let me introduce the second director, Jacob Roser, Jr. He was born January 3rd of 1894 in Missouri to Jacob Roser, a baker, and Frida Eugene Huber. He was the oldest of 3 children. Both of his parents had immigrated from Germany in the late 1800s. For a time, The family lived in St. Louis before moving to Manitou Springs, Colorado. Jacob Jr. graduated from Colorado College in 1916 with a Bachelor of Science in Forest Engineering. After graduation, he went to work for the Forest Service, being assigned to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, then briefly in Arizona. He took leave from the Forest Service to serve in the Army in World War I. While he was in service, he married Cora Scampser, a woman who he met in Manitou. Cora was the sister of Clara Scampser, Carlos Bates' clerk. After the war, Jacob joined the staff of the Fremont station in 1919. In 1922, Jacob became Bates' assistant. In 1927, he filled the post of director of the station. The Rosers had 3 children, Alan, Doris, and Jacob, who was called Jack. During the summers, when school was out, the whole family moved up to the station and felt very privileged to have a summer home in the mountains. In 1932, Roser began the most extensive planting program yet, the results of which can still be seen on the slopes of Wazilla and Noompa gulches. Because of the 8-year drought, staff had to hand carry water to these new plantations in buckets. One of the most faithful employees of the station was Sam, Jacob's horse. Sam served the station for 18 years, making countless trips to the incline to bring supplies. Sam died at the station and is buried there. After the station closed in 1935, Roser continued his lifelong career with the Forest Service. He was first assigned to Rocky Mountain Forest and Range Experiment Station, then to Custer, South Dakota in September of 1936, back to Fort Collins in 1946. By 1954, he had risen to the position of Assistant Forest Supervisor for the Pike National Forest. Jacob Roser died in Colorado Springs in October of 1971. According to his daughter, Jacob asked to be buried next to Sam. Roser's family had some influence in the area. Jacob's father owned a bakery in Manitou. His brother Edmund Roser opened the Craftwood Inn in Manitou. Jacob's son, Jack Latham Roser, was an El Paso County judge. The last person I would like to introduce is John L. Glendenning and his wife. He was born in 1883 in Missouri. In 1913, he married Florence Rupp of Monument, Colorado. She was the sister of Harry Rupp, one of the first workers at the station. They had 5 children, Mary, Margaret, William, Helen, and David. In 1911, John joined the Forest Service as a forest guard with an annual salary of $900. He, like all rangers of that time, had to provide his own horse and saddle. To be a ranger, you had to know how to ride, to take care of your horse, be skilled at woodcraft, be a marksman, know how to pack a mule, and be able to deal tactfully with all classes of people. Being a guard meant that he watched for and put out wildfires. From the diary of his first months in the service, we learned that most of these fires were started by the Short Line Railroad or the Manitou and Pikes Peak Cog Railway. Boxes of firefighting tools were stashed at key places around Pikes Peak. Another of his jobs was to sow seeds in the area that needed reforestation. He first raked the soil and then scattered seed. Then when he returned to these sites, he would often find that the chipmunks were having a feast. When this happened, he ordered poisoned wheat, which he then scattered at the site. John was promoted to forest ranger in 1913 and worked for a while at the Monument Nursery and then at Wagon Wheel Gap before being transferred to the Fremont station in 1916. By this time, John and Florence had two children, Mary and Margaret. I would like to share with you Florence's account of moving from Wagon Wheel Gap to the Fremont station. My husband was transferred there in the spring of 1916 from a similar station at Wagon Wheel Gap. Getting established at our new location was the greatest problem. By that time, the only way to get to the Fremont station was up the Manitou Incline Railway, and then walk about a mile on a well-built trail, or from Manitou up the steep foot saddle trail north of the incline. From Wagon Wheel Gap, we took our two little girls to my parents' home in Mount Monument, and then back to Alamosa for our two horses. We drove one of them to an open buggy and led the other back to Monument, where we left the buggy with my father. With small children, milk supply was essential, so we bought a cow from a nearby farmer and drove her almost 30 miles, cutting through the Garden of the Gods to Manitou, and then up the Cog Road to a point about a half mile directly below the trail from the top of the incline to the halfway house. The two trails were connected by a narrow path with numerous switchbacks. There, the cow, being understandably tired, staged a sit-down strike. It was growing dark, and the trail was not too distinct. Something had to be done. So with her halter rope around my saddle horn and my husband walking behind, we literally pulled and pushed her that half mile, pausing to rest at each turn. The rest of the way was fairly level and not far. We reached the station about 10 p.m. My husband milked the cow, though he had never milked before, and we all collapsed. The next day, I went back to Monument while my husband and a helper transported our furniture from the top of the incline using Binks, our white pack horse, and a burro hitched to the cart built narrow for use on the trail. In July of 1917, Florence gave birth to William. She went back to Monument for the delivery, but returned to the station soon after. In the spring of 1918, John resigned to join the Navy, and after the war, he returned to the Forest Service and served at several locations until he returned in 1943. He retired in 1943. John died in 1971 at the age of 88 in California. There are several reasons for closing the station. By 1935, the automobile was the preferred means of transportation, making the Fremont station somewhat inaccessible. The Fremont was considered too small and out of date compared with the new Rocky Mountain Forest and Range Experiment Station in Fort Collins, which inherited the research of the Fremont station. After several attempts to find a new use for the buildings at the station, including offering them to Dr. Clements, the Forest Service let a contract to demolish the buildings in 1945. The contractor was supposed to remove everything, including the foundations, and leave the ground in a natural state. Fortunately for history, the concrete remains. In closing, I would like to give Carlos Bates the last word. Those of us who know the situation best are naturally most reticent about proclaiming any absolute or final conclusions, realizing that every research, while giving us a better foundation of facts, opens up a lot of new problems which we hadn't thought of before. Well, thank you for tolerating my creaky voice. Let me stop sharing the screen so we
Thank you, Eric. That was very informative, and we invite our audience to ask questions. You can ask a question by communicating through the chat screen, or you can raise your hand under the reaction button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And do we have any questions out there for Eric?
I have a thank you so much. I've got to run from Tyler.
Okay, thank you, Tyler, for attending this morning. And Eric, maybe describe again, how do we find the Fremont Experimental Station?
Okay, the most direct way is to hike Bar Trail. And when you get to No Name Creek, which had a name at the time of the station, it was called Rock Creek. When you get to No Name Creek, there's a sign that says the Fremont Experimental Forest and points to the right. Bar Trail goes to the left. Well, if you take the right fork at No Name Creek, in about a quarter of a mile, you will come to some, let's see, I think the most obvious thing is a concrete stairway on your right. A little beyond that, there is another set of concrete steps. And if you go up that stairway, in the first set of stairs, you'll find a sign, an informative sign that tells you what was going on there.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Eric. And then we have a question from Jim. Where were the 4 plots with the clear-cut experiments?
They were on the leftmost branch of Rock Creek. There is a trail that's remaining there from the Forest Service. It's in places a little overgrown, but the best place to observe them is from the top of the incline. There is a trail that goes up to Crest Crags, which is a rocky outcropping that looks down on the Fremont Experimental Forest. And you can see at least 2 of the 200-foot square plots from that vantage point. And it's best to do this in the fall because the aspen are yellow, and those plots stand out quite visibly.
Good question.
Okay, thank you. Jim says thank you, Eric.
Got it.
And now he knows where that is, and we'll have to check it out. You mentioned during the course of the presentation a wife by the name of Florence Rupp. And was she in any relationship to a Rupp who was a former mayor of Manitou Springs?
I don't know.
I think one of the earlier mayors of our town's history, maybe around 1900 or so. I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Rupp. He was somehow involved with the construction of the Red Mountain Incline.
Oh, really?
It's a local name, from what I understand. And
well, Florence's family lived in Monument. Her father was a doctor in Monument, and as I said, her brother was one of the workers that built the station. But I have not heard the connection to the mayor, but that would be interesting to research.
Yeah, I think Mayor Rupp was also, if I'm not mistaken, an in-law of Jerome Wheeler, one of the earlier town founders.
Yeah.
But we encourage everybody, we invite everybody to ask questions of Eric. You can do so again by asking a question under the chat screen or by raising your hand under the reaction button. And do we have any more questions out there from the audience?
Doesn't look like it.
No, looks like we're good.
Well, I think it was a great presentation, Eric. Thank you so much. You get a thumbs up.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much, Eric, for the presentation this morning. It was very informative, as I mentioned. And Eric, you've been a good friend of the Heritage Center over the years, and we'd like everybody to check out Eric's books. We got 2 of those books in our bookstore, which can be found at ManitouSpringsHeritageCenter.org. There's the book relating to Fred Barr, as well as another one for the Manitou Incline. And Eric, again, you have a new book coming out in May. What is that book again?
It's going to be on the history of the summit of Pikes Peak and the highway. I had done research on the summit of Pikes Peak for the library's history symposium several years ago. And I showed that to a publisher, and he said, if you do that kind of research on the highway, it looks to me like a publishable book. Well, I thought, gee, what kind of history am I going to find on a strip of asphalt? But it turned out to be really interesting. I think if you do read the book, you will find some things that you didn't know about the Pikes Peak Highway and the summit as well.
Eric, Art Porter says he chatted several questions to you, so maybe you can answer those offline.
All right, let me look here. Okay, I see him. Yeah, I will. I don't know, Art, do you have my email address? And if you do, send me an email, because I don't think I'll be able to use chat after we shut down here.
Eric, do you want to share your email address? Would you be willing to do that?
Sure. I'll put it in the chat for everyone here. Whoops, I just turned chat off. Okay, to everyone. Okay. That should be in the chat box.
Yep, we can
Okay.
see it.
All
So
right.
if you'd like to message Eric directly, his email address is eswab@comcast.net.
Okay. And Mr. Haney, I see your microphone is unmuted. Do you have a question?
Oh, it's Betty. I put it to.
Oh, Betty. Hi,
I put
Betty.
it to Eric. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Betty.
Did Clement, who did all of that research from the 1890s, did he actually do any work with the Forest Service, or was he interested in what they were doing, or were they just doing totally separate research? That's one question.
I think their research was separate. It was well published. I mean, they were nationally known ecologists, and in fact, Edith published a series of Rocky Mountain wildflower books, which she illustrated with her own watercolor paintings. Very, very nice books, which are long out of print, collector's items. But I don't know of any direct connection with the Forest Service.
I've seen the tundra plots staked out up there above tree line.
Beside Sackett Peak.
Yeah, along the cog route.
Yeah,
Off
yeah.
to south.
That's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. So Eric, you explore and you write and you research my hat is just off to you for the extent of your deeper knowledge of our area. And it's also fun. And I know you have a talk coming up with the Historic Preservation Alliance on the 15th. Would you like to mention that? Because I think some of these people would like to tune in. Is that okay, Mike?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Betty.
Okay, that talk is going to be about, let's see, I gotta look it up. Let's see, on the 15th of April. Oh, yes. Yeah, this is going to be a fun talk. It's entitled Three Trails That Encircle Cheyenne Mountain, Three Tales of Provocateur, Infidelity, and one other undesirable trait. And basically, I am going to be talking about three trails that used to encircle Pikes Peak and were named for friends of Penrose, Henry Blackmer, Charles McNeil, and Russell Doherty. And some of you may know the McNeil Trail because it's the only one that's still, well, that's not quite true. It's the only one that's still accessible to the public. There is a little bit of the Blackmer Trail included in the Cheyenne Mountain State Park. But the talk is going to be mostly about those three men rather than trails, although I will talk about trails and Penrose's interest and support in trails. So that's going to be on the 15th of April at, I think it is 6 o'clock. Betty, do you know?
I'm looking. I think Betty has dropped off.
Oh, Betty Haney, are you still there?
I don't see her name anymore.
Well, if you go to the Historic Preservation Alliance website, you will see an announcement of that talk and the time. But I think it's at 6 o'clock in the evening.
Okay.
Okay.
And,
I'm here it's at 6:30. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I lost my full screen because I was looking it up. And it's bribery, provocation, and infidelity. Eric, you outdo
That's not
yourself.
sensational at all.
oh my. That sounds really racy, but do we have any, thank you, Betty and Eric on that. Do we have any other questions for Eric this morning? Let's see, I don't see any. Neil and Carrie, do you have anything else on that?
Nope.
Okay. And then
I'm
we
not
like.
being Neil today.
Okay, Eric, the Heritage Center again would like to thank you for this morning's presentation about the Fremont Experimental Station. And we, as I said, again, we invite everybody to our website to check out the books that have been authored by Eric Swab, and also to invite everybody again to our annual fundraising brunch scheduled for Mother's Day this year. And you can get tickets for your brunch at ManitouSpringsHeritageCenter.org. And again, we'd like to thank the audience too for coming this morning. Stay tuned on our website for future presentations, and also to get more information as to when the Heritage Center will reopen again. Thank you, Eric. We appreciate all that you do for the city of Manitou Springs in preserving its history and heritage. And you're a treasure to our community, Eric. We appreciate everything.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Happy trails to you, Eric.
Everybody have a good Easter holiday.
Yes.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon, Eric. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.